My parents called our move to Northridge a fresh start. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, and as we drove through the town for the first time, I felt an unshakable dread. The entire place was drowning in forest holiday cheer. Garlands were wrapped so tightly around lampposts they looked like they were being stringed. Every house blinked with an aggressive, frantic energy. My little sister, Tara, was mesmerized, her breath fogging the car window. I just felt cold. It was a perfect, festive postcard. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the image was torn, that something awful was hiding in the rip. The feeling followed us into the new house. I started noticing things my parents cheerfully ignored. The faint skittering sound from inside the chimney at night. The unusual number of bolts on the front and back doors. As if a previous owner was trying to keep something out. Or maybe keep something in. At school, I was an outsider. A ghost in the hallways. The kids here were different. They moved with a shared, silent anxiety, their eyes constantly darting towards the shadows. And they whispered, always whispering the same name, Anta. One afternoon, I cornered a boy named Kevin in the library. He was pale and shaking. He told me the full story. Anta, he said, was a perversion of Santa Claus, a tall, gaunt creature that wore a tattered red suit and smelled of pine needles and decay. It was an ancient thing that fed on the warmth of homes and the fear of children. It was drawn to new families, the ones who didn't know the rules. You have to leave out fresh cookies and warm milk, he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. It has to be a genuine offering. It can tell if you're just going through the motions. I tried to tell myself it was a stupid, cruel prank they played on new kids. Then, Michael, a boy who sat behind me in math, went missing. His family had moved here a month before us. The news report was vague. The search parties were grim. The next day, his desk was empty. No one spoke about it, but the silence was deafening. We all knew. I ran home and confronted my parents. I threw the newspaper with Michael's face on it across the dinner table. You don't get it? This is real, I screamed. My father slammed his fist on the table. Enough, he roared. I will not have these morbid fantasies in my house. My mother just looked away, her forced holiday cheer finally cracking. That night, I knew I was alone. While they slept, I crept into the kitchen. The house was unnervingly quiet. I pulled out the flour, the sugar, the eggs. Every sound was magnified in the silence, the crack of the shell, the whir of the mixer, the scrape of the spoon. This wasn't baking. It was a desperate ritual. I arranged the warm cookies on a plate, my hands trembling, and poured a large glass of milk. I set the offering by the cold, dark fireplace, a lump of ice in my stomach. As I turned to leave, my gaze fell on a reflective glass ornament hanging from the Christmas tree. In its distorted surface, I saw the living room window. And in the window's reflection, I saw a tall, impossibly thin shadow move across the backyard with the speed of a hunting animal. I spun around, my heart exploding in my chest. There was nothing there. Just snow, silence, and the suffocating darkness. The nights that followed were sleepless. I became a creature of the dark, haunting my own house. My post, a cold patch of floor by the upstairs hallway window. Every creak of the old house was a footstep on the stairs. Every gust of wind a whisper at the door. I watched Tommy's house across the street. Its cheerful, Christmas lights blinking in the dark. A beacon of naive peace. I felt like a watchman on a castle wall, guarding against a dragon no one else believed in. My parents' worried glances followed me. They thought I was sick, that the move had been too much for me. You're not sleeping, my mom would say. Her voice laced with a concern that couldn't reach the true source of my terror. How could I explain that sleep felt like a surrender? a betrayal of my post. One night, the stillness of the street was broken. It wasn't a car or a person walking their dog. There was a distortion in the shadows, a pocket of deeper black that seemed to unspool itself from the space between two houses. It was tall, impossibly so, and moved with a halting, unnatural grace that made my stomach clench. It wore the tattered red suit of Santa, a grotesque parody that was more terrifying than any monster I could have imagined. This was Anta. It glided across the street, untouched by the falling snow, its head twitching as if scanning for unseen frequencies. As it passed under a street lamp, the light didn't just flicker, it died with a pop, plunging that section of the road into absolute darkness. It stopped at Tommy's house. I wanted to scream, to call the police, to throw something through my window to make a sound, but I was paralyzed, a spectator in a nightmare. Then, with a series of sickening cracks that echoed across the silent street, Anta folded itself, its limbs bent at angles that bones were not meant to bend, its spine curving like a serpent's as it poured its lanky frame down the brick chimney. The sight was so fundamentally wrong it felt like my brain was trying to reject it. Moments later, a light came on in Tommy's room. I saw silhouettes against the curtain, a frantic, brief struggle. A single, high-pitched scream, sharp as glass, was abruptly cut off. It was the last sound Tommy would ever make. Then, with a blast of soot and ash, Anta erupted from the top of the chimney. It stood there on the roof, silhouetted against the moonless sky. And it wasn't alone. It held Tommy's body like a broken doll, his limbs hanging at odd, limp angles. The thing stood there for a long moment, a predator displaying its kill. And then, its head snapped around. Its face, a pale, skeletal mask with two pits of endless black 4 eyes, locked directly onto mine. It saw me. It knew. A slow, skeletal hand lifted, and it waved, a small, mocking gesture that said, "You're next." It tossed Tommy's body into a large sack, and with a leap that seemed to defy gravity, it vanished into the night. The police came. I stammered, trying to explain the impossible thing I had just seen. The officer just sighed, his face a mask of weary disbelief. A monster in a Santa suit? "Son, it's late. Go to bed." They left me standing in the cold, the flashing lights painting the snow red and blue. The only person in the world who knew the truth. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was a witness, and I was marked. The days bled into a gray smear of fear. Our town had become a gallery of missing children. Their faces smiled from every pole and window, paper ghosts rustling in the bitter wind. First Tommy, then others, then Sarah from my history class. Her empty desk screamed louder than any alarm bell. At school, the adults kept up the pretense, their forced cheerfulness a thin veil over the panic we could all feel. The other students and I moved through the halls like specters, sharing looks of grim understanding. We were the only ones who knew this wasn't a string of tragedies, it was a harvest. I tried one last time with my parents. I slammed Sarah's flyer on the dinner table. She wasn't a runaway. I yelled, my voice raw. My dad started to argue, shouting about mass hysteria, but the words died in his throat. He saw it in my eyes. He saw that I was right. The argument broke him. The denial shattered, leaving behind only raw, helpless fear. We were all trapped, and they knew it. But knowing and fighting are two different things. Their response was to lock the doors. Mine was to go to war. My first search was fruitless. Hours spent online, chasing shadows. Anta, Christmas demon, skinwalker Santa, nothing. It was like the creature didn't exist outside our town's borders. As I sat there in the dark, my hope curdling into despair. My phone buzzed. It was a link from Chloe. No message, just a link. My finger hovered over it, then I clicked. It wasn't a news site. It was something old, a digital relic from a forgotten corner of the internet. It told the real story. Anta wasn't a local legend. It was ancient, a demon of winter famine, a spirit that thrived on the hunger and cold of the old world. Christmas, with its light, warmth, and feasting, was an agonizing insult to it. It wore the skin of Santo as a mockery, a way to sour the season's joy. The site was filled with crude, terrifying drawings of its history, but it also held one critical detail: a weakness, a curse. The legends called it a sweet tooth, not a craving, but a compulsion. An ancient pact that forces it to take any offering of sweetness left for it. It has to. Reading the words, a plan began to form in the ruins of my fear. It was a terrible, desperate plan, but it was something. It was the only thing. I went to the kitchen and found the plate of Christmas cookies my mom had baked. The fancy ones, with thick frosting and shimmering sugar crystals. I arranged them on a plate, a ritualistic offering. This wasn't a polite request for Santa. This was bait. I was going to use the demon's own ancient rules against it. Sleep is no longer a refuge. It's a hunting ground. That night, it found me. In the dream, I was in my bed, but the silence was wrong. It was a thick, predatory silence. A thin black line of shadow seeped under my door, like ink bleeding into paper. It pooled in the center of my room and began to rise. Bones cracked, joints popped, and the thing that was once a shadow stood tall. It wasn't wearing the Santa suit this time. It was something older, or a nightmare of famine, all jutting bones and stretched, gray skin. It glided to my bed, its feet making no sound, and a hand colder than any winter ice clamped over my mouth. I was paralyzed, a silent scream trapped in my throat as it dragged me from my bed and into the hall. I saw my parents' door, my sister's door. I saw the untouched cookies on the fireplace hearth as we passed. The demon paused, its head rotating with an unnatural crunch to face me. Its empty eyes seemed to burn right through me as a lipless grin stretched its face. It was telling me, without a word, that the rules were meaningless, that my small offering was an insult. I woke up gasping for air, the feeling of that cold hand still phantom-like on my face. The next morning, the cookies sat on the hearth, a monument to my failure. My family watched me, their eyes wide with a new, shared terror. The denial was gone, replaced by the suffocating presence of a truth they could no longer ignore. We were living in a cage, and the bars were made of fear. I knew the cookies weren't enough. The website Chloe sent me, I had only scratched the surface. I went back to it, my heart pounding, and found a link I'd missed before, hidden at the bottom of the page. It was labeled The First Winter. Clicking it was like opening a forbidden book. A history of our monster, told in crude, animated woodcuts. It began centuries ago, in a village much like ours, trapped in a winter that would not end. The animation showed a starving elder, a man of respect, walking into the frozen woods as a last resort. He performed a ritual, a blood offering to an ancient, malevolent spirit of hunger, the entity that would eventually be called Anta. He didn't just pray for survival. He made a pact. In exchange for saving his people, the demon demanded a host, a vessel to carry its own endless, gnawing hunger into the world. The man agreed. He became the first. The Santa suit, the website explained, was a perversion of his former role as the village's provider, its giver. The demon twisted his generosity into a predatory mockery. He was cursed to forever be drawn to the joy and abundance of the holiday season, a feast he could see but never share, driving him to steal the most precious thing a family has, its children. As I stared at the screen, the final piece of the puzzle slotted into place with sickening clarity. The sweet tooth wasn't a simple compulsion. It was a test. A way for the demon to find its next host. The final text on the page burned in my mind. The curse is passed not to the wicked, but to the one most starved of hope. And I realized I wasn't just baiting a monster. I was applying for a job. My paranoia had become a constant companion. I'd have long, whispered conversations with Chloe in places we were sure no one could hear us, finalizing the details of my self-destruction. The plan was simple. I had to be the most miserable, hopeless soul in town. I had to become a beacon for the demon. I had to make myself irresistible. Christmas morning was the most surreal day of my life. We went through the motions, a family of ghosts. We opened gifts. The smiles were brittle, the thank yous were choked. It was a pantomime of a life we no longer had. But then I gave Tara her gift, the doll she'd wanted all year. And for a perfect, heartbreaking minute, the darkness vanished. Her smile was real. Her joy was pure. And I knew that giving her that one last perfect moment was worth anything, worth everything. Then came the cake. My 18th birthday. My official entry into an adulthood I had no intention of living. I blew out the candles and said nothing. That night, I sat and waited. No ceremony. No bait. Just me, an empty vessel. The hours ticked by on the new watch my father had given me. 1 hour. 2, nothing. The silence was absolute, and a dangerous thought began to bloom in the back of my mind. What if I was wrong? What if the nightmares, the shadows, were just the creation of a mind collapsing under pressure? For a wild, intoxicating moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we would be okay. Maybe it was over. That's when I heard it. A sound from the roof. A heavy, rhythmic asterisk thump. Drag, thump asterisk. It wasn't the sound of reindeer. It was heavy, like something impossibly large being dragged across the shingles. Footsteps. My blood turned to ice. Every instinct, every cell in my body screamed at me to run. Get up. Hide. Barricade the door. Do something. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. It wasn't a choice. It was as if my brain had severed the connection to my limbs. I was a statue carved from fear. My eyes were locked on the ceiling as the footsteps stopped, directly over me. A fine dust sifted down from the drywall. A low, groaning creak echoed from deep within the chimney. It was here, and all I could do was sit there, frozen, and listen to it coming down. The sound coming down the chimney wasn't jolly. It was the sound of a body breaking itself to fit, a symphony of wet cracks, dry snaps, and the grinding of ancient bone on brick. The air grew thick with the smell of soot and cold earth. I was a statue on the floor, my mind screaming while my body refused to obey. Too long, black feet landed in the ash, and the creature unfolded itself to its full, impossible height. It surveyed the room like a king, then turned and walked up the stairs. Each heavy footstep on the wood above was a hammer blow to my heart. My door opened. It was a silhouette of pure dread, a void in the shape of a monster. It glided to me, leaned in close, and I saw it all. The paper-thin skin over its skull, the cold, dead light in its eyes. It took a long, slow sniff, an appraisal that went straight to my soul, and then it smiled. It was a smile of dismissal. I wasn't what it wanted. It left. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the universe. In that silent moment, I understood. My birthday. I was 18, an adult. I had aged out. I was... Safe. That safety lasted for a single, selfish heartbeat. It was vaporized by a new sound, a soft creak down the hall. Tara's door. I heard her sleepy, hopeful voice. Santa. It was followed by a shriek that tore the world apart. Then she screamed my name. Over and over. A desperate, terrified plea for her big brother to save her. But I couldn't move. I was a prisoner in my own skin. Tears of helpless rage carving tracks on my face. A silent scream was building in my chest. A pressure that was going to break me apart. All I could do was listen. I heard the lamp crash. I heard her bed splinter. I heard the sickening, repeated thud of her small body hitting the wall. I heard her screams die into a wet, choked gurgle. I heard her being dragged. I heard the scraping sound ascend the chimney. And then, silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that was worse than any noise. The paralysis shattered. A raw, animal sob tore itself from my throat. I scrambled to her room. It was a war zone. The window was shattered. The bed was overturned. Her new doll was face down on the floor. She was gone. My parents' screams joined my own. My dad, in a fit of primal grief, ran outside with his shotgun and emptied it into the empty, uncaring sky. The police came. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket I didn't feel, and recited the lie that would become my life. I was asleep. I didn't hear anything. It was easier than the truth. They called it an abduction, a cold case, a tragedy. We moved a week later. I sat in the back of the car and watched our house, our life, disappear in the rearview mirror. We were a family of 3 strangers, haunted by a 4th who was taken in my place. I don't sleep much anymore, because every time I close my eyes, I am back on that floor. Safe, and I am listening to my sister scream my name.